I expect you from the north. The path winds in between the honeysuckle and the pines, among the poison ivy and the small flowers and shrubs. I'm reading from one of John Barrowman's sonnets. The sonnet is, I think, one of the most powerful, amazing forms of poetry that there is. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Have a little quote here from Madeleine L'Engle from the classic novel A Wrinkle in Time. Life with its rules, its obligations, and its freedoms is like a sonnet. You have given the form, but you have to write the sonnet yourself. We'll talk a little bit about sonnets, how they work, kind of what the forms do and don't do. One of the things I'd like to encourage you to do is to pause the video from time to time so that you can read the sonnets that are on the screen. I won't do that just so that the lesson itself can go in a timely fashion, but I want to encourage you to read them out loud so that you can hear the way the rhythm works, the way the rhyme works, the way the end rhymes don't always meet the way that we expect them to, and mostly so that you can kind of enjoy them. This poetry works a lot better, particularly in forms like sonnets, when we can hear them as well as read them on the page. Literally, the word sonnet means little song. Traditionally reflects a single sentiment, clarification with a turn of thought in the concluding lines. Typically, a sonnet has 14 lines, at least the classical sonnet does. Is written in what is known as iambic pentameter. You might remember that little phrase from your days studying Shakespeare in high school. And we'll look at kind of how iambic pentameter works here in a couple of minutes here. There are variable rhyme schemes depending on the kind of sonnet that one is attempting to write or one is reading. One of the best known is the Petrarchan sonnet. It's sometimes called an Italian sonnet. Usually has an 8-line octave in the beginning with a rhyme scheme of A, B, B, A, B, B, A, and the sestet, the last 6 lines, have a different rhyme scheme, and you can see the various forms that we have here. If you look here where I have the first 4 lines marked in what is known as scanson, which is basically the way that we look at the stressed and unstressed syllables. Iambic pentameter, pentameter means that there are 5 feet. Each foot is, in this case, 2 syllables long, iambic, which iambic usually means an unstressed, then stressed syllable. So we have in this sonnet by John Milton, when I consider how my light is spent, ere half my days in this dark world and wide. You notice that there's an unstressed, then stressed syllable, unstressed, then stressed syllable to help you along. The Shakespearean sonnet, or English sonnet, it's both called the same, has the same iambic pentameter, but instead of the octave and sestet, you have 3 quatrains. Each quatrain is 4 lines long, and a couplet 2 lines long. And you have usually a rhyme scheme of A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. And as we know, the number of poets do vary the rhyme scheme. You can look at the example of the first couple of lines of this Shakespearean sonnet. Let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. Love is not love which alters when it alteration finds. Even though I stumble sometimes when I'm reading, the iambic pentameter often does mirror what feels like very, very common speech. When you're writing a sonnet, you might not necessarily worry too much about stresses and unstressed syllables, but try to pay some attention to them so that you can get a rhythm that seems fairly natural for the reader. You really don't necessarily want your sonnets to become sing-songy, so that they are just da 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 da. There are a number of variations on the two traditional models of the English and the Petrarchan sonnet. A blank verse sonnet has the same rhythmic pattern but no rhyme at the end. Okay, this has become incredibly popular in more modern times to have less rhyme in there. Stretch sonnet has 16 or more lines. There's a form called the sonnet redouble, also known as a crown of sonnets, which is actually several sonnets that are put together. Here we have 15 sonnets linked so that the final line of one sonnet is the initial line of the next, and the final line of the sonnet is the initial line of the previous. A sonnet sequence is a group of sonnets that share the same subject matter, sometimes giving a dramatic situation and a persona. You'll certainly notice that this poem by Rainer Maria Rilke has much different line lengths and even line rhythms. So Mr. Rilke had a different kind of vision of how the sonnet itself would work. Here's another example of a sonnet that might be worth pausing to read by Edmund Spenser. This sonnet is called The New Colossus by Emma Lazarus. This is the poem that is actually inscribed on the Statue of Liberty. You may have even heard lines from it, particularly in the middle, towards the end. It's a variation on the Petrarchan sonnet. The "Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to be free." It's very famous lines that we have oftentimes heard. And to end with, you might think a little bit about the poem here by Madeleine L'Engle. I thought since we started with Madeleine L'Engle, we would end a little bit with that. One other item or idea about sonnets that's worth paying attention to is the fact that the sonnet oftentimes begins with a problem or a quandary or a question that seems to need to be answered, or something, a philosophical problem, much like the Milton poem that we looked at earlier, which starts off with Milton talking about his blindness and what that means for him as he is supposed to do something with his life, and then at the end coming to a conclusion. The sonnet oftentimes, usually in the last 6 lines or so, comes to an answer or a conclusion. It's not always a moral or a lesson, but oftentimes it is a turning point in the poem where the speaker of the poem seems to see something else, or see an answer, or see a resolution to the problem. And thank you very much. I hope you enjoy reading these sonnets, and I hope you will go back and look at them, and I hope that you will also enjoy writing them.